Standing in my own driveway, I stared at the locksmith changing the locks on the house I'd owned for 37 years. My son Marcus stood beside his wife's brother, both watching me with cold satisfaction. "It's no longer yours, don't come in," Marcus had said when I arrived home from the hospital an hour ago, my surgical incision still tender. The papers in his hand bore my forged signature. I smiled sweetly, reaching for my phone. They had no idea what I'd been planning for the past week. My name is Brienne, and at 65 years old, I thought I'd seen enough of life to avoid its cruelest surprises. 3 years had passed since my husband Thomas died of a heart attack, leaving me alone in our Victorian home in the suburbs of Philadelphia. It wasn't just any house. It was the place where we'd raised our sons, celebrated 34 Christmases, and built a lifetime of memories. The property value had soared to $850,000, but its worth to me was immeasurable. Marcus was our only child born when I was 27. I'd left my position as assistant bank manager to raise him returning to work only when he started high school. Those early years were golden. He was a bright boy, affectionate and curious, always eager to help his father in the garage or assist me in the kitchen. But something changed when he met Stephanie during his senior year of college. I remember their wedding 5 years ago like a scene from someone else's life. Stephanie wore a designer dress that cost more than most people's cars, funded by credit cards Marcus couldn't afford. Her family occupied one entire side of the church, loud and ostentatious, treating the sacred ceremony like a business merger. Her father Carl had the kind of handshake that felt like he was measuring your worth. Her mother Donna smiled with her mouth, but never her eyes, and her brother Jake kept talking about investment opportunities to anyone who'd listen. The changes in Marcus were gradual at first. He stopped calling as often. Sunday dinners became monthly, then disappeared altogether. When Thomas died, Marcus stayed for the funeral, but left immediately after claiming Stephanie needed him at home. I grieved alone, finding solace in my garden and the familiar walls of our house. 2 months before my accident, I'd noticed strange things. My spare key went missing from under the ceramic frog in the garden. Mail disappeared from my box. Once I came home from grocery shopping to find the back door slightly ajar, though nothing seemed disturbed. I mentioned it to Marcus, but he dismissed my concerns. "You're getting older, Mom. Maybe you forgot to lock it." The morning of my accident started like any other. I woke at 6, made coffee, and prepared to retrieve the newspaper from the front porch. The moment my foot hit the first stair, everything went wrong. My heel slipped on something slick and invisible. I tumbled down all 12 steps, my body twisting and cracking against the hardwood. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. My hip felt like it had exploded, and breathing sent lightning through my ribs. I lay there for 20 minutes before my neighbor Janet heard my weak cries. The ambulance ride blurred into emergency surgery, a broken hip, 3 cracked ribs, and a concussion that required monitoring. The doctors said I was lucky. At my age, the fall could have been fatal. During those first days in the hospital, swimming in and out of consciousness from pain medication, I noticed Marcus and Stephanie's strange behavior. They visited daily, but not with flowers or concern. Instead, they rifled through my purse while thinking I slept. I heard them whispering about documents, asking nurses if I'd mentioned a safety deposit box or lawyer. "She keeps everything important in that old desk," Marcus told Stephanie one afternoon, unaware that I'd reduced my pain medication to stay alert. "The house deed has to be there." "Well, we need to move fast," Stephanie replied. "My father says the power of attorney needs to be filed while she's still considered incapacitated." My blood ran cold, but I kept my breathing steady, feigning sleep. After they left, I pressed the call button with a trembling hand. When the nurse arrived, I asked for a pen and paper, claiming I wanted to write a letter. Instead, I began documenting everything. The next days revealed the depth of their scheme. Carl visited with a briefcase, speaking in hushed tones about legal procedures and necessary documentation. Through my medicated haze, I understood their plan. They were going to steal my house using forged documents while I lay helpless in a hospital bed. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They assumed that a 65-year-old woman recovering from trauma would be too weak too confused, too trusting to fight back. They forgot that I'd spent 40 years in banking, trained to spot fraud and deception. They forgot that mothers who truly love their children can recognize when those children have lost their way. On my 5th day in the hospital, still pretending to drift in and out of consciousness, I overheard the conversation that changed everything. Marcus was on his phone in the hallway just outside my room. The door was cracked, and his voice carried clearly. "Don't worry, Jake. Your parents can move in by the time she's released. The house will be legally transferred by Monday. Mom's still out of it. She won't even know what hit her until it's too late." I felt my heart break and harden simultaneously. My own son, the baby I'd nursed through fevers, taught to ride a bicycle and sent to college with every penny we'd saved, was orchestrating my destruction. But grief would have to wait. Right now, I needed to be smarter than all of them combined. That night, I began my counterattack. The pain in my body was nothing compared to the determination in my spirit. They wanted to play games with a banker who'd spent decades catching fraudsters. They'd chosen the wrong target. What they didn't know was that I'd been recording every visit on my phone, hidden carefully under my pillow. Technology might be associated with the younger generation, but this old woman knew how to use every feature when survival was at stake. The nurses had noted Marcus and Stephanie's odd behavior in their charts. Several had mentioned to me how unusual it was for visitors to seem more interested in paperwork than patient care. These angels in scrubs would become my unwitting allies in exposing the truth. As I lay in that hospital bed surrounded by the beeping of machines and the antiseptic smell of recovery, I made myself a promise. They might have thought they were stealing from a helpless old woman, but they were about to learn that age brings wisdom, experience, and a ruthlessness that comes from having nothing left to lose, but everything to protect. The house Thomas and I built with love would not become their prize. My son might have lost his moral compass, but I would make sure he found it again, even if I had to destroy everything he thought he'd gained. The game was on, and I intended to win. Recovery is a strange companion when you're pretending to be sicker than you are. Every instinct screamed at me to leap from the bed and confront the vultures circling my life, but patience would be my greatest weapon. I let my head loll to the side when Marcus entered, kept my responses sluggish and confused when doctors made their rounds. The Academy Awards had nothing on the performance I was delivering. Patricia, the night nurse, was the first to see through my act. She was a woman in her 50s with kind brown eyes and gentle hands that spoke of years tending to the vulnerable. During a late-night check when the ward was quiet and the conspirators were home plotting, she caught me fully alert scrolling through my phone. Well, she said softly, closing the door behind her. Looks like someone's feeling better than she's letting on. I could have continued the charade, but something in Patricia's face told me she was trustworthy. Maybe it was the way she'd frowned when Stephanie pawed through my belongings, or how she'd made extra notes when Marcus asked about my mental capacity. "My son is trying to steal my house," I whispered the words tasting like poison on my tongue. Patricia pulled up a chair, her expression hardening. I wondered about those two. In 30 years of nursing, I've seen enough family dramas to recognize wolves in sheep's clothing. She told me about her own grandmother swindled out of her life savings by a nephew who'd promised to care for her. The pain in her voice was fresh despite the decades that had passed. By the time she finished, we'd formed an alliance. Patricia would help me contact my lawyer using her personal phone, keeping the calls off my hospital records. Harold Fitzgerald had been my attorney for 25 years, handling Thomas's estate and our regular legal needs. When I explained the situation, his usually calm voice turned sharp with anger. "Brianne, this is serious. Filing fraudulent documents is a federal crime. Are you certain about Marcus's involvement?" "I have recordings, Harold. They're planning to move Stephanie's family into my house. They think I'm too medicated to understand what's happening." Harold's investigation began immediately. What he discovered made my stomach turn. The power of attorney and quitclaim deed filed with the county contained my signature, but it was wrong. My middle initial was listed as M instead of N, and my birth date was off by a year. amateur mistakes that suggested hurried forgery. "These won't hold up under scrutiny," Harold assured me. "But we need to catch them in the act for the strongest case. Can you maintain this pretense a bit longer?" 3 days later, Stephanie brought her entire family for what they thought was a victory lap. I lay still, breathing deeply as they discussed their plans for my home. "The kitchen needs a complete remodel," Donna declared, her nasal voice grating against my nerves. "All those old appliances have to go." "I call the master bedroom," Jake added. "That view of the garden is perfect for my meditation practice." Carl, the patriarch of this den of thieves, spoke with disturbing confidence. 20 years of practice, and this is my best work yet. Not even a handwriting expert could tell the difference." They laughed about their previous exploits, mentioning towns in Florida where they'd perfected their scheme. 3 elderly victims, all women living alone, all left destitute, while Stephanie's family moved on to the next target. I forced myself to remain still as rage burned through my veins. The best part, Stephanie giggled a sound like breaking glass, is that Marcus actually believes we'll pay off his gambling debts once we sell the house, as if we'd waste the profits on his stupidity. So that was it. My son hadn't just betrayed me, he'd been played by masters of manipulation. It didn't excuse his actions, but it added another layer to this sordid tale. Marcus had inherited his father's trusting nature without any of his wisdom. Dr. Harrison, my physician, became another unexpected ally. During a private consultation, I confided my situation. His expression went from skeptical to furious as I showed him the evidence I'd collected. "Elder abuse is a crime I take personally," he said, his normally jovial face stern. "My own mother faced something similar. Here's what we'll do. I'll document that you're recovering well, but keep the official paperwork vague. When you're ready to leave, I'll discharge you without fanfare. They won't see you coming." The early discharge plan required careful orchestration. Patricia adjusted schedules so sympathetic staff would be on duty. Dr. Harrison prepared paperwork that showed continued confusion and weakness, a medical fiction to support my deception. Harold arranged for a private investigator to document activities at my house. 2 days before my planned discharge, I made a disturbing discovery. While pretending to doze, I overheard Marcus on the phone with our insurance company, inquiring about life insurance policies. The casual way he asked about beneficiaries and claim procedures chilled me to the bone. Had their plan always included ensuring I never returned home at all? That night, Patricia brought me a cup of tea and sat beside my bed. "You know, sweetie, I've been thinking. These people sound dangerous. Maybe you should go straight to the police." "Not yet," I replied, though fear gnawed at my resolve. "I need irrefutable evidence. Marcus is still my son, and I want him to have a chance at redemption. But if they've truly planned something worse—" I couldn't finish the sentence. Patricia squeezed my hand. "I've been documenting everything in my notes. Times, dates, suspicious conversations. If anything happens, there's a trail." The next morning brought a new twist. Roger, my friend from my banking days, called Harold with disturbing news. Marcus had attempted to access my investment accounts, but the fraud detection system had flagged the suspicious activity. $47,000 had already been drained from my checking account, but my other assets remained secure. "He doesn't know about the safety deposit box," I told Harold, thinking of the gold coins Thomas had collected over the years, now worth nearly $200,000. Or the $1 million life insurance policy Thomas left. I never told Marcus about that. "Good. Let them think they've gotten everything. Criminals get sloppy when they believe they've won." As my discharge date approached, I perfected my act. When Marcus visited, I called him by his father's name and asked why the hospital was so cold. When Stephanie came, I clutched her hand and babbled about recipes and gardening. They exchanged satisfied smirks, convinced their pathetic victim was sliding into senility. But every night I reviewed my recordings, studied the legal documents Harold prepared, and planned my return home. They'd turned my sanctuary into a crime scene, but I would reclaim it. The woman they'd dismissed as weak and confused was actually a calculating force preparing to strike. On my last night in the hospital, I stood by the window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, my house stood vulnerable to invasion. Stephanie's family was probably already choosing paint colors and arguing over bedrooms. Marcus was likely drinking himself to sleep, convincing himself this betrayal was justified. Tomorrow. I whispered to my reflection, seeing not a victim, but a warrior. Tomorrow, the real game begins. Patricia appeared beside me, having finished her rounds. You know what my grandmother used to say? The sweetest honey comes from the strongest hive. Those bees that look small and harmless, they're the ones with the deadliest sting. I smiled, feeling stronger than I had since the accident. Your grandmother was a wise woman. Just like you, Brienne, just like you. As I settled into bed for my last night as a patient, I thought about the journey ahead. They'd pushed me down those stairs thinking they'd broken more than bones. But sometimes it takes a fall to remind us we know how to fly. Tomorrow, I would spread my wings and show them exactly what kind of woman they'd tried to destroy. The night was dark, but dawn was coming, and with it, justice. The morning of my discharge arrived crisp and clear, one of those perfect September days that made Philadelphia shine. Patricia helped me dress in the clothes. Harold had brought a simple gray cardigan and slacks that made me look every bit the frail grandmother they expected to see. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was costuming myself for the performance of my life. Dr. Harrison checked me one last time, his expression carefully neutral as Stephanie waited in the hallway. Remember? He said quietly while checking my blood pressure. Confusion and weakness. You're going home against medical advice because your family insists. I nodded, then let my face go slack as Stephanie entered. Who are you, dear? I asked her, adding a tremor to my voice. She barely contained her eye roll. I'm your daughter-in-law. Remember, we're taking you home now. The ride to my house was torture. Marcus drove while Stephanie texted furiously on her phone. I caught glimpses of her messages. Almost there. Make sure everything's loaded. My heart sank as I realized they were already moving my belongings out. Nothing could have prepared me for the scene that greeted us. A massive moving truck blocked my driveway, its ramp down, and men carrying furniture I recognized with painful clarity. My grandmother's antique dresser, the dining room set Thomas and I had saved for during our first year of marriage, and most heartbreaking of all, 4 men struggling with my baby grand piano, the one Thomas had surprised me with for our 25th anniversary. Careful with that, I cried out before catching myself. Marcus glanced at me sharply, but I quickly added, Pretty piano, is it mine? Not anymore, Stephanie muttered under her breath. As Marcus pulled up to the curb, I saw them all, Carl directing the movers with military precision, Donna wrapping my china in newspaper, and Jake carrying boxes labeled with my careful handwriting. My life was being dissected and distributed like carrots at an estate sale. I stepped out of the car on shaking legs, though only half of the trembling was performance. The rest was pure rage carefully contained. My neighbors were watching from windows and yards, their faces showing confusion and concern. Mrs. Chen from next door started toward me, but Jake intercepted her. Family business, he said curtly. Please give us privacy. The walk to my own front door felt like approaching a guillotine. Marcus held my elbow, his grip just shy of painful. When we reached the porch, he stopped me. Mom, there's something we need to discuss. He pulled out a folder, and I recognized the forged documents Harold had described. You're not well enough to live alone anymore. We've made arrangements for you at Sunset Meadows. I knew that place. It was a bottom-tier facility on the outskirts of town, the kind that made headlines for neglect and violations, the kind that paid kickbacks for referrals. I don't understand, I whimpered, letting tears flow. They were real tears born of betrayal so profound it threatened to break me. It's for your own good, Stephanie said, emerging from my house wearing my pearl necklace, the one Thomas had given me when Marcus was born. These old lady pearls will look better on someone younger anyway. The cruelty was so casual, so complete. I wanted to rip the necklace from her throat, but instead I collapsed onto the porch steps, sobbing. Please, this is my home. Thomas and I built this home. Well, Thomas is dead, Carl said, appearing in the doorway with a satisfied smirk. And you're too senile to manage property. Lucky for you, your son has power of attorney now. I want to see the papers, I said between sobs, playing the confused elder, trying to understand. Marcus actually looked uncomfortable as he showed me the documents. There it was, my signature boldly forged across multiple pages. See, you signed these last week in the hospital. I don't remember, I wailed, which was true. I didn't remember signing papers I'd never seen. Jake emerged carrying my jewelry box. Hey, some of this stuff might actually be worth something. That ring looks like real diamonds. That's my wedding ring. I reached for it, but he held it above my head like a schoolyard bully. Was your wedding ring, he corrected. Everything here belongs to us now. Legal transfer of property. The movers continued their work, and I watched my life disappear into the truck. Each piece carried memories: the bookshelf Thomas built when I was pregnant, the kitchen table where Marcus took his first steps, the armchair where I'd nursed him through chicken pox. Please, I begged Marcus, grabbing his sleeve. I'm your mother. How can you do this? For just a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, regret. But Stephanie appeared and wrapped herself around his arm. Because he loves me more than a manipulative old woman who tried to control him his whole life, she hissed. You always made him feel guilty, always demanded attention. Well, now you'll get plenty of attention at Sunset Meadows. The lie was so outrageous I nearly broke character. I'd supported every decision Marcus made, even when I disagreed. I'd welcomed Stephanie despite my reservations. I'd given them space money when asked and unconditional love. But history was being rewritten by the victors. Ma'am, is everything all right here? Officer Janet Mills stood at the end of my walkway, her presence causing the entire scene to freeze. She was young, maybe 30, with sharp eyes that took in every detail. Carl stepped forward, oozing false charm. Officer, we're just helping my mother-in-law move to assisted living. She's been having some dementia issues. Is that so? Officer Mills looked directly at me. Ma'am, are you going willingly? This was my moment. I could tell her everything, blow it all open right now. But I needed more evidence, needed them to fully incriminate themselves. So I nodded sadly. My son says it's for the best. She studied me for a long moment, then handed me a card. If you need anything, call the station. Elder Affairs take these situations seriously. After she left, the family's behavior became even bolder. Donna emerged wearing my fur coat despite the warm weather. Carl lit one of Thomas's cigars on my porch. They were claiming territory like animals. Oh, I almost forgot, Stephanie said with mock sweetness. We'll need your car keys, too. Can't have you trying to drive in your condition. I handed them over with shaking hands, each surrender a calculated step in my plan. Harold was recording everything from his car parked across the street. The private investigator was photographing from the neighbor's yard. Every cruel word, every stolen item was being documented. Time to go, Mom, Marcus said, not meeting my eyes. The facility is expecting you. Can I at least get some clothes? My medications? I asked. We'll send them later, Carl said, clearly lying. You need to leave now. As they escorted me to a waiting taxi, I turned for one last look at my home. Stephanie's family had already changed the locks. Jake was directing movers to load my piano with shocking carelessness. 37 years of memories being erased in a single afternoon. But hidden in my purse was my phone still recording. In my pocket was the business card from Officer Mills. And in my heart was a determination forged from the hottest flames of betrayal. The taxi pulled away and I watched my house disappear in the rear mirror. The driver, an older gentleman with kind eyes, glanced at me with concern. Sunset Meadows. He asked, reading the address Marcus had given him. No, I said, quietly pulling out the card Harold had given me. The Marriott downtown, please. Thank God, he muttered. That place is a death trap. You got family that can help. I thought of Harold waiting at the hotel with legal documents and evidence. Of Patricia, who'd promised to testify about what she'd witnessed. Of Detective Sharon Mills, who specialized in elder abuse and was about to receive the case of her career. Yes, I said, sitting straighter. I have the family I choose, not the family I born with. As we drove toward downtown, I pulled out my phone and sent Harold a simple text, "Phase 1 complete." They took the bait. His response was immediate, "Room 412. We have everything we need." The city passed by in a blur of buildings and lives untouched by betrayal. Somewhere behind me, Stephanie's family was celebrating their victory, dividing my possessions like pirates with treasure. Marcus was probably drinking, trying to silence whatever conscience remained. They thought they'd won. They thought I was a weak old woman heading to a nightmare facility where I'd quietly fade away. They had no idea that every tear, every plea, every moment of apparent weakness was carefully orchestrated. The taxi pulled up to the Marriott and I stepped out with renewed purpose. The game was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. And this time, I wasn't playing the victim. I was playing to win. The Marriott hotel room became my command center. Harold had arranged everything: a laptop printer, boxes of evidence, and most importantly, a secure environment where I could drop the facade of frailty. As I walked through the door, I straightened my spine and felt 65 years of strength flow back into my body. Brienne. Harold rose from the desk, his silver hair catching the afternoon light. How did it go? I pulled out my phone, still recording, and ended the session. 6 hours of evidence. They confessed to everything while stealing my entire life. Detective Sharon Mills arrived within the hour. She was older than the officer I'd met earlier, with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. Her handshake was firm, professional, and somehow reassuring. "Mrs. Coleman, I specialize in elder fraud cases. What you've described is unfortunately common, but the evidence you've collected is extraordinary." We spent the next 3 hours reviewing recordings. Sharon's expression darkened with each revelation, particularly when Carl bragged about his forgery skills and Stephanie mentioned the elderly victims in Florida. "This is interstate fraud," Sharon said, making notes. "I'll need to contact the FBI, but first tell me about your son's involvement." That was the hardest part. Describing Marcus's betrayal felt like performing surgery on my own heart without anesthesia. He owes money to dangerous people, gambling debts. Stephanie promised her family would pay if he helped steal my house. Harold pulled out a folder. "I've done some investigating. Marcus owes approximately $180,000 to various creditors, including some connected to organized crime." The room fell silent as we absorbed this. My son hadn't just betrayed me, he'd put himself in mortal danger. The mother in me wanted to rush to his rescue, but the victim in me knew he had to face consequences. Sharon's phone buzzed. "Excuse me." She stepped away, her face growing grim as she listened. When she returned, her expression was grave. "I just heard from my colleague in Florida. Stephanie's family matches the description of suspects in 3 elder fraud cases. One victim, Eleanor Weston, died under suspicious circumstances 2 months after signing over her property." My blood ran cold. They're planning something similar for me. The investigation into Mrs. Weston's death was closed for lack of evidence, but the detective always suspected foul play. Your case might provide the break they need. Roger, my banking friend, arrived with more disturbing news. "Brienne, I've traced the money Marcus stole. It's already been transferred to multiple accounts, all under Carl and Donna's control. They're professionals at this." The private investigator Harold hired knocked and entered, carrying a tablet full of photos. "I've documented everything at your house. They're already listing your antiques on online auction sites. Your piano is advertised for $15,000. Each photo was a fresh wound. My mother's china being bubble-wrapped, Thomas's tools loaded into Jake's truck, our photo albums tossed carelessly into garbage bags. They weren't just stealing possessions, they were erasing our history. "There's more," the investigator continued. "I ran background checks. Carl has used 6 different aliases over the past decade. Donna was arrested in Miami for a similar scheme, but charges were dropped when the victim died before trial." "Just like Eleanor Weston," Sharon murmured. Patricia arrived after her shift, still in scrubs and looking exhausted but determined. "I brought copies of my nursing notes and the security footage from the hospital. You can clearly see them going through your belongings while you were supposedly unconscious. We worked through the night building an airtight case. Harold drafted emergency injunctions while Sharon coordinated with federal agents. Roger traced financial trails that revealed the stunning scope of the family's crimes, over $2 million stolen from elderly victims across 5 states. As dawn broke, I stood at the window watching Philadelphia wake up. Somewhere across the city, my house was occupied by criminals who thought they'd won. Marcus was probably passed out self-medicating his guilt, but their time was running out. "Brianne," Harold said gently, "we need to discuss next steps. To make the strongest case, we need them to incriminate themselves further. Are you willing to meet with them?" "What did you have in mind?" He smiled, and I recognized the sharp legal mind that had protected my interests for decades. "A settlement meeting. You'll offer to sign over the house legally in exchange for your personal belongings and the $47,000 they stole. We need them to admit on tape that the original documents were forged." "You want me to play victim one more time?" "One last performance," Sharon added. "We'll have you wired agents nearby. The moment they confess, we move in." I thought about it, weighing risk against reward. These people were dangerous, possibly murderous, but they were also arrogant, convinced they'd broken me. Pride would be their downfall. "Set it up," I decided, "but not at the house, somewhere public." "There's something else," Sharon said carefully. "We found Patricia's notes about Stephanie asking about other ways to handle difficult elderly parents. Combined with the Florida cases, we believe you could be in physical danger." The room grew quiet. It was one thing to know they'd stolen from me, another to realize they might be planning something worse. But fear wouldn't stop me now. If anything, it strengthened my resolve. Roger pulled up more financial records. "Look at this. 2 days after Eleanor Weston died, large insurance payouts were deposited into accounts linked to Stephanie's family. They're not just thieves. They're predators who've turned elder abuse into a business model." "How many victims?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "That we can trace at least 12 over 7 years. You're the first to fight back effectively." The weight of that settled on my shoulders. This wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about justice for Eleanor and all the others who died confused and alone, while their killers prospered. Harold's phone rang. He listened, then smiled grimly. "Marcus wants to meet about the settlement. He sounds desperate." "The gambling debts," Roger suggested. "His creditors won't wait forever, and Stephanie's family has no intention of paying." "He made his bed," I said, surprising myself with the coldness in my voice. "Now he has to lie in it." But even as I said it, the mother in me ached. How had my bright, loving boy become this stranger willing to destroy his own mother for money? When had Stephanie's poison completely corrupted him? Sharon's partner, Detective Jim Crawford, arrived with files from Florida. "Eleanor Weston's case is being reopened. The coroner found traces of digoxin in preserved tissue samples. It's a heart medication that's lethal in high doses." "Stephanie's a registered nurse," Patricia gasped. "She'd have access to that drug." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. They weren't just con artists. They were killers who'd perfected their method. Befriend the adult children, turn them against elderly parents, steal everything, then eliminate witnesses. "We need to move fast," Sharon decided. "They might accelerate their timeline if they feel threatened." I thought about my beautiful house, now a crime scene, about Marcus trapped between criminals and creditors, about Eleanor Weston who died alone and betrayed. Most of all, I thought about Thomas, who'd worked so hard to build our life together. He would expect me to fight, to be smart, to win. "Schedule the meeting," I said firmly. "Let's end this." As the team dispersed to prepare, Patricia stayed behind. "Are you sure about this, Brianne? These people are dangerous." "So am I replied, meaning it. "They made one fatal mistake. They underestimated me. They saw an old woman and assumed weakness. But I've survived 70 years on this earth, buried a beloved husband, raised a child, and built a career in a male-dominated field. I'm not weak. I'm experienced. And experience beats youth every time." Patricia hugged me carefully, mindful of my still healing ribs. Give them hell! As she left, I returned to the window. The sun was fully up now, painting the city in gold. Somewhere, Stephanie was wearing my pearls. Carl was smoking Thomas's cigars. Donna was sleeping in my bed. But not for much longer. The trap was set, the players in position. All that remained was the final act. And I was ready for my starring role. The restaurant Harold chose was perfect, an upscale establishment in Center City, with discreet booths and a reputation for privacy. More importantly, it had excellent acoustics for recording equipment. I arrived early, taking time to prepare mentally for what could be the performance of my life. Sharon had insisted on a full security detail. Federal agents posed as diners at nearby tables. Harold sat at the bar, seemingly absorbed in legal documents. The wire taped to my ribs felt strange, but reassuring, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight. I dressed carefully for the meeting, a worn cardigan, comfortable shoes, and no jewelry. Every detail crafted to reinforce their image of me as a defeated old woman ready to surrender. The Brienne they expected to see, not the warrior I'd become. Marcus arrived first, and my heart clenched at his appearance. He'd lost weight, his clothes rumpled and stained. Dark circles under his eyes suggested sleepless nights. Good. I thought, then hated myself for the satisfaction I felt at my son's suffering. Mom, he said, sliding into the booth across from me. His hands shook as he reached for water. Marcus. I kept my voice small, uncertain. I'm confused. Why did you put me in that hotel? The facility was full. He lied smoothly. We're finding you a better place. Stephanie arrived next, wearing my pearl necklace like a trophy. The sight of it against her throat made my fingers itch, but I clasped my hands in my lap and smiled weakly. Carl entered with the confidence of a man who'd never faced consequences. His expensive suit was probably purchased with some victim's life savings. He sat beside Marcus, placing a briefcase on the table with theatrical importance. Brienne, he said, using my first name like we were old friends. I understand you want to discuss the property transfer. I don't remember signing anything, I said, adding a tremor to my voice. But Marcus says I did, so I must have. The medicine makes everything fuzzy. Stephanie actually smirked. Of course it does. That's why Marcus has power of attorney now, to protect you from yourself. Under the table, I pressed the small button Sharon had given me, signaling that all parties were present. Around us, agents shifted slightly, ready to move. I just want my things back, I pleaded. My photos, some clothes, and the money from my account. I need it for the nursing home. Carl opened his briefcase, revealing official-looking documents. We're prepared to be generous. Sign these papers acknowledging the legal transfer of your property, and we'll return your personal items and $20,000. $20,000, but they took $47,000. Fees, Carl said smoothly. Legal expenses, moving costs. These things add up. I let tears fill my eyes. I suppose that's fair. You've all been so helpful during my confusion. Marcus flinched at that, but Stephanie placed a warning hand on his arm. Don't let her manipulate you, honey. Remember what we discussed. About what? I asked innocently. Nothing, Mom, just sign the papers. I picked up the pen with shaking fingers, then paused. But wait, if I already signed the house over, why do I need to sign again? The table went silent. Carl's expression tightened. Additional documentation. Government requirements. Oh, I set the pen down. My lawyer friend at the senior center said I should never sign things twice. She said that might mean the first signature wasn't real. Your lawyer friend is wrong, Stephanie snapped. Just sign it. I need to understand. I persisted, channeling every confused elderly person I'd ever known. If the papers you filed were real, legal, proper, then why? Because they weren't. Marcus exploded, then immediately paled as he realized what he'd said. Carl shot him a murderous look. What Marcus means is, no. I interrupted, my voice growing stronger. I want to hear what my son means. Marcus. My son looked between Stephanie and Carl, then at me. For a moment, I saw the boy who'd brought me dandelions and called them flowers. Then Stephanie squeezed his hand, and the stranger returned. "The original documents had some errors," he said carefully. "Minor technicalities." "What kind of errors?" I pressed. Carl took over. "Your middle initial was incorrect, a simple typo." My middle initial, the one I've used for 65 years, I let confusion show. How could I get my own initial wrong? "You were medicated," Stephanie nearly shouted, causing nearby diners to look over. She lowered her voice. "You weren't thinking clearly." "So you're saying I signed papers with the wrong name while drugged?" I asked. "That doesn't sound very legal." Carl's face was reddening. "Listen, old woman, you can make this easy or hard. Sign the papers, take your money, and disappear. Or we can make sure you're declared incompetent and locked away where no one will listen to your ravings." There it was, the threat delivered with such casual cruelty. I glanced at Harold, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. We had what we needed, but I pushed for more. "Like Eleanor Weston?" I asked quietly. The table froze. Stephanie's face drained of color. Carl's hand moved toward his briefcase. "Who?" Marcus asked, genuinely confused. "Nobody," Stephanie said quickly. "Your mother's having another episode." Eleanor Weston from Florida. I continued, my voice gaining strength. The woman who signed over her house and then died mysteriously, just like the others. Carl stood abruptly. "We're done here. Marcus, get your mother under control or what?" I asked, standing too. "You'll forge more documents, steal more houses, kill more old women." "You crazy!" Stephanie lunged across the table, but federal agents were already moving. "FBI, nobody move." The restaurant erupted in chaos. Carl tried to run but was tackled by an agent posing as a waiter. Stephanie screamed obscenities as she was handcuffed to my pearls, catching the light as she struggled. Marcus sat frozen, his face a mask of shock as officers surrounded our booth. "Brianne Coleman, you okay?" Sharon appeared beside me, her badge visible. "Never better," I replied, pulling off the wire. "Did you get everything?" "Every word, especially the confession about forging documents." I watched as they led Carl away, his arrogance replaced by panic. Stephanie was still fighting, screaming about discrimination and false arrest, but it was Marcus who held my attention. My son sat with his hands cuffed, tears streaming down his face. "Mom," he said, his voice small and broken, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." "I know," I replied, and found that I meant it. "But sorry doesn't erase what you did." Detective Crawford approached with evidence bags. "We're executing search warrants at your house and their hotel. We'll recover everything they stole." As they led Marcus out, he looked back one last time. "They said they'd pay my debts. They said you'd be fine in the home. You never meant to get caught," I finished. "That's different from never meaning to do it." The restaurant slowly returned to normal as crime scene tape was removed and statements were taken. Harold appeared at my elbow, his usual composed demeanor cracked by a satisfied smile. "Brilliant performance, Brianne. You got them to admit everything." "What happens now?" I asked, suddenly exhausted. "Now we build the case. With what we recorded today, plus the evidence from the house, they're facing federal charges. Fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy, and possibly murder, if the Florida investigation proves fruitful." I thought about Eleanor Weston finally getting justice after death, about the other victims who might finally see their tormentors punished. It should have felt like victory, but all I felt was tired. Patricia arrived as I was giving my official statement, enveloping me in a warm hug. "I heard on the news. You did it." "We did it," I corrected. "Without you, Harold, Sharon, everyone, I couldn't have fought them." As evening fell, Harold drove me to a different hotel. My house was still a crime scene, and exhaustion was catching up with my healing body. But as I settled into the clean sheets, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Thomas died hope. The phone rang. Sharon's voice was excited. "Brianne, we found everything at the house. Your belongings, evidence of other crimes, and a journal where Stephanie detailed plans to overdose you with your own medication. She wrote about Eleanor Weston, too. This is huge." I closed my eyes, processing how close I'd come to being another statistic. What about Marcus? He's cooperating fully. Turns out he recorded some conversations too, insurance against Stephanie's family double-crossing him. He's still facing charges, but his cooperation will help. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness thinking about the day's events. Justice was in motion, but the personal cost was staggering. My son was headed to prison. My trust in family was shattered. My home was tainted by their schemes. But I was alive. I was free. And I was stronger than they'd ever imagined possible. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, legal proceedings, recovering my possessions, rebuilding my life. But tonight, I'd won the first battle in a war I never wanted to fight. And that was enough. The federal courthouse in Philadelphia had never seen a case quite like ours. Media attention was intense, with reporters calling it the Granny Scam Gang case. I hated the nickname, feeling it diminished the severity of the crimes and the strength of the survivors. But Harold reminded me that public attention meant public pressure for justice. The arraignment was a spectacle. Carl, Donna, and Jake were brought in wearing orange jumpsuits, their earlier arrogance replaced by the hollow look of the caught. Stephanie had to be escorted by 2 officers, still spitting venom at anyone within earshot. Marcus entered last, his head down, shoulders slumped in defeat. The United States versus Carl Morrison, Donna Morrison, Jake Morrison, Stephanie Coleman, and Marcus Coleman, the clerk announced. The sound of my son's name alongside career criminals felt surreal. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Linda Chen, laid out the charges: interstate fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy, forgery, and attempted murder. For Stephanie, additional charges related to Eleanor Weston's death. The list seemed endless, each count representing destroyed lives and stolen futures. Your Honor. Linda addressed the judge. The defendants operated a sophisticated criminal enterprise targeting elderly victims across 5 states. We've identified 12 victims with combined losses exceeding $2 million. At least 1 victim died under suspicious circumstances after property transfer. Carl's lawyer, a nervous man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, requested bail. My client has ties to the community and poses no flight risk. Your client has 6 known aliases and was arrested with false passports, Linda countered. He's the definition of flight risk. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, denied bail for Carl and Donna. Jake received a $1 million bond he couldn't make. Stephanie was held without bail pending murder charges. When it came to Marcus, I held my breath. Mr. Coleman is cooperating with authorities, his public defender argued. He's provided crucial evidence and poses no danger to the community. The judge studied Marcus for a long moment. Bail set at $200,000. Mr. Coleman, you're to have no contact with your mother or any witness in this case. I watched my son being led away, knowing he had no one to post bail. The gambling creditors had ensured he'd burned every bridge except the one to me, and that bridge was now closed by court order. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I'd prepared a statement with Harold's help. Elder abuse is not about age. It's about vulnerability and trust betrayed. I hope our case encourages other victims to speak up and seek help. The following weeks blurred together in a symphony of legal procedures. I testified before a grand jury, reliving every moment of betrayal. The FBI recovered most of my belongings, though some items were damaged beyond repair. My piano thankfully was rescued before being sold. Patricia testified about the hospital incidents. Roger detailed the financial fraud. Detective Crawford presented evidence from Florida linking Stephanie to Eleanor Weston's death. The case built like a fortress, each testimony another stone in the wall of justice. Marcus's cooperation proved invaluable. From his jail cell, he provided recordings of Stephanie's family planning sessions. He revealed their previous victims' names, leading to more charges. He even testified about Stephanie's medicine plan. For me, his voice breaking as he described how she'd researched undetectable poisons. She said it would look natural. Marcus told the court, tears streaming. A confused old woman taking the wrong dose. She had it all planned out. The investigation expanded internationally when authorities discovered Carl had been wiring money to offshore accounts. The scope of their crimes grew daily, each revelation more shocking than the last. They weren't just con artists. They were a multinational criminal organization specializing in elder abuse. 3 months into the legal proceedings, I received unexpected news. Marcus's ex-wife, Jennifer, contacted me through Harold. She wanted to bring their daughters, Emma and Sarah, to see me. They miss their grandmother, Jennifer explained when we met at a coffee shop. Stephanie kept them away, told them horrible lies about you, but they're old enough now to know the truth. Emma, now 12, looked so much like Marcus at that age it hurt. Sarah, 10, had Thomas's eyes. They were shy at first, but when I showed them photos of their father as a child, the ice broke. Dad's in jail, Emma said quietly. Mom explained why. He did bad things to you. He made terrible choices, I agreed. But he's still your father and he loves you. Do you hate him? Sarah asked with a child's directness. I considered the question. I hate what he did. I'm disappointed and hurt, but I don't hate him. Love doesn't disappear even when trust does. We began meeting weekly, rebuilding relationships Stephanie had tried to destroy. The girls shared stories of their father's degradation, how Stephanie had controlled everything, how they'd been afraid to visit me because Stephanie said I was dangerous. More lies, more manipulation exposed. The trial date approached like a gathering storm. Linda Chen spent hours preparing me for testimony, warning me about defense tactics designed to portray me as confused or vindictive. But I was ready. Every slight, every theft, every betrayal had forged me into an unshakable witness. Media coverage intensified. Other victims came forward with similar stories. A support group formed for elderly fraud victims. I found myself becoming an inadvertent spokesperson for a cause I'd never wanted to champion. Harold managed the civil suits, working to recover assets and damages. The house Stephanie's family had tried to steal became evidence in multiple cases. My Victorian home, once a sanctuary, was now a crime scene, photographed from every angle. One evening, while reviewing testimony with Linda, she shared something that stunned me. Eleanor Weston's daughter wants to meet you. She says you gave her mother justice she thought impossible. The meeting was emotional. Margaret Weston was my age, with eyes that held the same pain I felt. They told my mother she was being dramatic, that her complaints were dementia symptoms. No one believed her until you fought back. We cried together, two women bound by loss and betrayal, but also by strength and survival. Her mother hadn't lived to see justice, but Margaret would see it for her. As the trial date neared, I prepared myself for the hardest part, facing them all in court. Carl, who'd smoked Thomas's cigars while stealing our life. Donna, who'd worn my clothes while planning my death. Jake, who'd laughed while loading my furniture. Stephanie, who'd corrupted my son and plotted murder. And Marcus, whose betrayal cut deepest because I'd given him life and he'd nearly taken mine. But I was ready. The frightened woman who'd fallen down her stairs was gone. In her place stood a survivor backed by law and righteous fury. They'd tried to erase me, but instead had created their own destroyer. Justice was coming, and I would be there to see it served. The trial lasted 3 weeks each day, revealing new depths of the conspiracy. I testified for 2 full days, my voice steady, as I recounted every betrayal, every moment of fear, every calculated cruelty. The defense attorneys tried to paint me as confused, vindictive, even senile, but the evidence was overwhelming. Stephanie's journal proved to be the smoking gun. In her own handwriting, she'd detailed plans to handle me like she'd handled Eleanor. The jury saw entries about dosages timing and how to make it look accidental. They saw her notes about other victims reduced to dollar signs and property values. When the verdicts came, I sat in the gallery surrounded by my chosen family, Harold, Patricia, Roger, and Jennifer with the girls. Sharon and her team filled the rows behind us. Margaret Weston held my hand as the judge read the decisions. Carl Morrison guilty on all counts, 25 years federal prison. Donna Morrison guilty on all counts, 20 years federal prison. Jake Morrison guilty on all counts, 10 years with possibility of parole in 7. Stephanie Coleman guilty of murder in the first degree for Eleanor Weston plus all fraud charges. Life without parole. Marcus Coleman guilty of conspiracy and fraud. 5 years with possibility of parole in 2. As they led Stephanie away, she turned to me with such hatred that officers stepped between us. "This isn't over," she screamed. "You destroyed my family." "No," I said quietly, my voice carrying in the sudden silence. "You destroyed mine first." Marcus looked back once, mouthing, "I'm sorry," before disappearing into custody. Despite everything, my heart broke a little. The boy who'd brought me dandelions was truly gone, replaced by a man who'd have to find his own redemption behind bars. Outside the courthouse, victims and their families gathered. Some had flown in from other states to see justice served. We embraced, cried, and shared a moment of collective relief. The nightmare was over, but healing would take time. The next months focused on restoration. My house required extensive repairs and cleaning to remove all traces of the occupation. I hired contractors to restore what had been damaged, but some things couldn't be fixed. The sense of sanctuary was gone, replaced by memories of violation. I established the Elder Protection Foundation with the recovered assets and insurance money from Thomas I'd never touched. Patricia agreed to serve as director, bringing her medical expertise to help identify at-risk seniors. We created educational programs, support groups, and a hotline for victims. The foundation's first major case came within weeks. An elderly man in New Jersey called suspicious about his daughter-in-law's sudden interest in his finances. We connected him with legal resources and law enforcement, preventing another tragedy before it began. Marcus wrote from prison long letters full of remorse and revelation. Through therapy, he was understanding how Stephanie had manipulated him, playing on his insecurities and gambling addiction. He wasn't excusing his actions, just trying to understand them. I visited him once 3 months into his sentence. He'd gained weight, looked healthier despite the circumstances. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he said through the glass partition, "but I want you to know I'm getting help. Real help." "That's a start," I replied, meaning it. "Focus on becoming the man your daughters can be proud of." Emma and Sarah visited regularly, bringing art projects and school reports. Through them, I rediscovered joy. We baked Thomas's famous chocolate chip cookies, planted a garden, and slowly built the relationship Stephanie had tried to steal. A year after the trial, I made a decision that surprised everyone. I sold the Victorian house. The memories, both beautiful and horrible, were too heavy to carry. Instead, I bought a smaller home in a secure community with proper locks and a state-of-the-art security system. Paranoid, perhaps, but I'd earned the right to feel safe. The old house sold to a young family with 3 children. Watching them explore the rooms where Marcus had grown up felt like completing a circle. Houses are meant for living, for creating new memories. Mine had served its purpose. I used the sale proceeds to expand the foundation. We opened a legal clinic offering free services to elderly fraud victims. We funded research into elder abuse prevention. Most satisfyingly, we successfully lobbied for Brianne's Law legislation that increased penalties for elder fraud and made it easier to prosecute interstate cases. Speaking engagements took me across the country. I stood before audiences of seniors, legal professionals, and healthcare workers sharing my story. Each time grew easier, the pain transforming into purpose. If my experience saved one person from similar trauma, it was worth reliving. 3 years passed. Marcus earned parole through good behavior and genuine rehabilitation. He emerged humble, working as an addiction counselor himself. The reunion with his daughters was tearful but hopeful. He'd never live with them again, but he could be part of their lives. "I can't undo what I did," he told me during a carefully supervised visit. "But I can spend the rest of my life making sure no one else makes my mistakes." He volunteered with the foundation, sharing his story from the perpetrator's perspective. His talks to gambling addicts about how desperation could destroy families were powerful, raw, and necessary. Carl died in prison, a heart attack that no one suspicious found suspicious. Donna aged rapidly behind bars, her health failing without victims to sustain her. Jake was released but immediately violated parole and returned to prison. Stephanie remained unrepentant, filing endless appeals that went nowhere. Life settled into a new rhythm. Breakfast with Patricia, who'd become my closest friend. Weekly dinners with the grandchildren. Foundation work that gave meaning to my days. Garden club meetings where no one knew my story unless I chose to share it. On my 70th birthday, surrounded by chosen family and reclaimed blood relatives, I reflected on the journey. The fall down my stairs had broken more than bones. It had shattered illusions about family trust and safety. But from those breaks, I'd built something stronger. "Grandma, tell us the story about how you caught the bad guys," Sarah asked, now 13 and fierce like her grandmother. "It's not a fairy tale," I warned. "We know," Emma said seriously, "but it's important. You showed that being old doesn't mean being weak." So I told them age appropriately about trust and betrayal, about wolves in sheep's clothing, about the strength that comes from surviving the worst. I told them about choosing who deserves your trust, about the difference between blood family and heart family, about forgiveness that doesn't forget. As the candles flickered on my birthday cake, I made a wish, not for the past to change or the pain to disappear, but for every vulnerable person to find their voice and their strength, for every predator to face justice, for every broken family to find whatever healing was possible. The assembled crowd sang, "Happy Birthday," their voices a chorus of survival and hope. Harold raised a toast to the strongest woman I know. Patricia added, "and the most stubborn." We laughed, the sound filling my new home with warmth that no thief could steal. Later, as guests departed and quiet returned, I stood in my garden. The roses Thomas and I had planted at our first home were gone, but these new blooms were mine alone. Different, but still beautiful, still worth tending. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Happy birthday, Mom. Thank you for saving my life by refusing to let me destroy yours." I smiled, tucking the phone away. Forgiveness was a journey, not a destination. Trust once shattered could never be fully restored. But love endured, transformed by truth and tempered by pain into something more honest than before. Looking back, would I change things? Prevent the fall, the betrayal, the long fight for justice? Perhaps. But then I wouldn't have discovered my own strength, wouldn't have helped other victims, wouldn't have learned that sometimes the worst experiences forge the strongest people. They thought they were stealing from a weak old woman. Instead, they created a warrior who brought down their criminal empire. They thought age meant vulnerability. Instead, it meant wisdom, experience, and the kind of determination that comes from having survived 7 decades on this earth. My name is Brianne Coleman. I am a mother, grandmother, survivor, and fighter. I was pushed down, but I got back up. I was betrayed, but I found justice. I was broken, but I rebuilt stronger. And if you're reading this because someone you trust is trying to harm, you know this: you are not alone. You are not weak. And you are definitely not finished fighting. To everyone listening to this story, have you or someone you know faced similar betrayal from family? How did you find the strength to fight back? Please share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might be the hope someone else needs to hear. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe to hear more real-life tales of triumph over adversity. Share this with anyone who needs to know they're stronger than those who would harm them. Thank you for joining me on this journey from victim to victor. Remember, your age is not weakness. It's wisdom waiting to be weaponized. Stay strong, stay smart, and never let anyone convince you that you're too old to fight for what's yours.